Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles. I'm delighted to be joined by the director of the incredible documentary from here. Christina, it's lovely to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
Oh, no, of course. We are from LA to Seattle. But for those that haven't seen this incredible documentary, let's take a look at the clip. Christina, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so blessed that you brought your film to us. For those that haven't seen it, tell us a brief synopsis of your film.
Yeah, thanks. From Here follows 4 artists and activists from immigrant families over the course of a decade as they move from their 20s into their 30s, as they're really forging their own sense of identity and belonging. But they're all sort of at the crosshairs of contemporary immigration debates in one way or another. So they're on in many ways, what ties them together, because it's 4 characters who are all living independent lives, don't know each other at all, but who people have been treated like outsiders in their own home, and how they deal with that through their art, through their activism, and really imagining a future for all of us. What's a little bit distinctive and adds some complexity to the film is 2 of them are in Berlin and 2 of them are in New York. So it's set in these 2 major immigration centers and hubs of art and culture and sort of global politics. So it's a look at how a generation of young people really across the world, and really at least you can say in Europe and the US, who are confronting rising nationalism, are articulating a different way forward.
Christina, I thought your style of the documentary, the way you delivered it to us, was like how I hope the future of documentary filmmaking is. Like, I really felt like you set a wonderful tone, and you know, to keep that balance of New York and Berlin with these different characters, it was just so well put together, because I know how much footage you have to get to kind of make that documentary yourself, and it really was tremendous. I'm so curious, because obviously this is a big topic, you know, in many different cities, but particularly New York and Berlin, which you focused in upon. Where did the inspiration come for you in deciding over these 2 cities and then finding these incredible people to be part of your film?
Yeah, the 2 cities, Berlin and New York, in some ways they make perfect sense, but in many ways the issues around belonging, migration, identity, citizenship that sort of all play out over the course of the film are issues that are playing out not just in major cities, but in small towns all over the US, all over Europe, and much of the world. Immigration and migration are really just part of the human condition, but have escalated in the last several decades due to technology and due to, you know, climate change and conflict and all these reasons. So they're just so much part of our condition. But I chose these 2 cities both for personal reasons and then also sort of larger political reasons. So on the personal front, I lived in New York for 15 years. It was my home. It was the natural place for me to base the film. It's sort of like the kind of hub of, like, if you think of an immigration city in the world, you think of New York. So how people are grappling with those questions in New York feels like really relevant in a global conversation. And then Germany's the biggest immigration country in Europe. That's something that doesn't get a lot of attention. Berlin is sort of the cultural capital of the arts in Europe in many ways. So they have a certain synergy in terms of their like gravity as cities in their respective continents. But also I had a fellowship to go to Berlin. So I was looking for a city to pair with New York. New York was sort of my home base. And I was thinking about what city could I bring in conversation with New York. And I got this fellowship and I had already started working with these ideas. And I thought, Berlin could be interesting. I don't know anything about Germany really, except for kind of stereotypes about whatever basic stuff. I hadn't studied German language. I hadn't studied German history particularly, but I got there at a moment where there had just been new integration policy passed in Germany. And there was a really interesting way that really problematic way that integration was getting talked about as a sort of universally positive thing, but actually was getting used in very, I would say, in very coded ways. And it was a lot of white Germans talking about what immigrants need to do to be part of society, and very little of immigrants and children and grandchildren of immigrants speaking for themselves about their experience in Germany. And so when I started putting out this idea just to people I met, like, oh, what if I worked on this film in Germany with New York? Everyone was, please do it here, please do it now. And suddenly, as soon as I put the word out, I kind of had this whole team of collaborators. And so it felt like Germany chose me. So suddenly it was like, I guess I got to take some German classes, and I guess I got to read some German history and figure out where the heck I am. Because the idea for Europe had really come from my time living in Greece, which is where I have also family, and really seeing the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment there, and how they were struggling with that as a country, and how my own family was struggling with it, how people, Greeks of all backgrounds, were struggling with it. So so the inspiration came from Greece and my own kind of experience being in the quote unquote motherland that was struggling with its identity. And then Germany kind of, I feel like, chose me in a certain way. So, and then the protagonist, there was a big process. I spent actually years really to find those 4 stories that I felt like complemented each other in the right way. It was very intensive. The first year I interviewed 50 people. I talked to, more than 100 before I interviewed those 50 people. And then I chose 4 people ultimately to follow for years. But yeah, it was longer than I expected. You think
it was worth
the first
it.
pieces of the puzzle felt really easy, but then by the end, it was like everyone really needed to complement and be different and add something unique to the story. And so it felt really specific. I got more specific as I went on.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you took the time to obviously find the right people that can, like you say, complement each other. I mean, I fell in love with your subjects of this film, like, each in their own different ways had so much to deal with. And I think, especially when you've lived like yourself, in a place which is full of many people from many different parts of the world, I think it was such an important element to add in the fact that there's a lot of struggles and people things that people don't understand that one goes through, and that kind of really trying to find your own identity in a place that feels so different, and a place that doesn't feel like it truly accepts who you are. And I thought that was really carried well, obviously, in the film. Was that kind of something important to you? Because I feel like we only see a very one-dimensional look at immigration and don't really understand just how difficult it is for not only for people to adapt to new countries, but even when they go back to their original country, they feel very kind of like different as well. And I thought you portrayed that beautifully with what they were all going through.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think that like the search for identity experience throughout their lives, right? And migration in terms of like crossing borders, whether it's a national border or even just moving from one side of the country to another side of the country, you're forced to confront questions around identity that you're not forced to confront when you sort of stay in one place. So I think that there's an inherent conflict created by that kind of movement, not conflict in a sense that it's unreconcilable, but just that it produces all kinds of questioning. And I think that questioning is really fertile if it's explored, because these fixed identities are actually really illusions. But so if you're actually forced to question all of the fixity of any kind of border of belonging, I think that that's valuable for all of us, whether or not we have that experience ourselves or not. In terms of immigration, I think the stories so often focus on the drama of the crossing of a border, or the drama of the first year of arrival somewhere, or the humanitarian crisis in a camp, and those are all really important stories. So it's nothing against that. It's more that this is a kind of another layer to the impact of migration is generational. It's not that it ends after, the year after you arrive, suddenly everything sort of ends. It's generations on, we're continuing to like work with these stories inside of us. And also, we have our family stories we're working with, and we also have how governments are treating us and how society is treating us, receiving us.
Absolutely.
So I have had, it's kind of a really surprising experience sometimes of having people come up to me after they see the film and say, I literally, when we did a rough cut screening, this was the first time someone said it, but now I've heard it a few more times, like, this is the closest representation of my experience as an immigrant that I've ever seen. And I was really surprised, because I feel like there's so many films that kind of touch on these subjects, but I think that often they are pretty narrow. And
Mhm.
so allowing the like scope of what kind of material made it into the film to be both that kind of ephemeral stuff around place and belonging and home, at the same
Yeah,
time as the structural stuff around papers and citizenship, and like that both of those things coexisted in the film, I think created some space for people to find themselves in the film. So that's what I
definitely.
hope.
Definitely. And let's just start with your New York cast. Like, I mean, Tanya, I mean, can she please run for any government office job? Like, she is unbelievable. How blessed we are to have her in this country, to be honest with you, because her fight is, she's like the Pied Piper. She could just bring a whole, I couldn't believe her story. Tell us a little bit about working with her. I mean, I can't even get over how fantastic she is, and all the things she's doing is incredible. What was that experience like, especially being on the front line with her with some of these interviews and things? How was that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tanya is incredible. And I knew that I was looking for somebody who could really illuminate what it's like to be undocumented in this country, and documented, and having grown up here, not undocumented and newly arrived. Um, but I couldn't have imagined someone who had so much. I mean, she had just had so many dimensions to her story, and including that, on the one hand, she's a super fierce activist. And when I met her, she had just kind of devoted herself fully to her activism. She wasn't being paid for any of it, but she'd realized that as somebody who was undocumented in the US, like, nothing was changing for the better. And unless she became part of the change, like,
Mhm.
her life would be basically in this gridlock. She'd be stuck working in restaurants for the rest of her life, essentially, despite her master's degree, despite all of her kind of talents and qualifications. So she had just like thrown herself in, like her life depended on it. And it's true. I mean, Obama, this was during the Obama era, was deporting immigrants at a higher rate and speed than any president up to that point. So the sense of real, like, families being torn apart. Meanwhile, Democrats are saying to the immigrant community, oh, we have your back, we have your back, we have your back. But actually, in real terms, people's families were being torn apart. Um, so yeah, I think the stakes were really high, not just for her, but for the whole movement of young people
Yeah.
who really were taking political power in that moment, and
Hmm.
using their stories and coming out as a way of really affecting the conversation. So I
Yeah.
feel so blessed that I got to be really close to her as that movement was also taking shape. Um, and I learned a tremendous amount. I mean, the kind of bravery, the kind of fearlessness that she was choosing to
Hmm.
really affect change on a daily basis. But I think the other beautiful thing about her story is how she went from really taking kind of really action on her own, her very own individual life. And
Yeah.
as I followed her for a decade, and she actually managed to adjust her immigration status.
It's
She became
amazing.
more committed to the issues. So now Tanya
Yeah.
continues to be an organizer. She's become like more outspoken than ever. And
And
now she's
helping others too, which she did, what she's doing. It's been an advocate voice. And I mean, listen, I think, and I mean, kind of leads well with Sandeep, and as well, like Sandeep was just amazing. Sunny. I was, well, I want to buy all his albums, by the way, because he's a fantastic musician. But there was a very, I mean, I could talk about everyone for hours, because they're such brilliant people. But I mean, it was very touching to see his journey too, and so touching of just how he was supporting young Sikh children and helping them, and just again, like Tanya, just helping the next generation coming through. How was it experiencing? Because I felt like he obviously went through quite a journey in the film as well, and it was so good to see him shine at the concert and all those other things. But there's a lot there that most people don't get to see of what he has to go through too.
Right. Right. Yeah. So Sonny, when I met him, he was in this political rock band. And I really didn't know what the story was going to be. I just thought this guy was amazing and I needed to follow him around, but I wasn't really sure how we were going to let this unfold. And immediately he was sort of the plot thickened when his rock band, which happened to be all white men, really insisted on recording a song that had lyrics that were really insulting religious people, in Sonny's opinion. And as somebody who wears a religious marker, is a turban wearing Sikh, he felt extremely tokenized. And that journey that actually plunged him into his community wasn't something that he expected, definitely wasn't something I expected. But I think also Sonny is somebody who, is from a community that's actually it's the 5th biggest religion in the world. And in the US, we know almost nothing about Sikhism. It's completely exoticized. It's completely, people mistake it for all kinds of other religions. So the kind of harassment and bullying and Islamophobic violence that Sonny and the Sikh community in general has experienced and continues to experience. I mean, we just saw in Indianapolis, it's barely been covered, that about half of the people who were murdered in the mass shooting a few weeks ago were Sikh, and there was probably a dimension of that violence that was hate motivated, but it's not barely covered. So the Sikh community is barely covered. So I think Sonny felt a strong responsibility, and still does, to really represent the Sikh experience out in the world. And it was beautiful to have the opportunity to get close to that community as well, because people were so eager to actually share their stories.
Yeah, again, it was a very important, you really captured some unfortunate times in history in the United States of obviously that horrible shooting that took place. And it was a very essence of reality of what's going on in this country and other parts of the world as well. Listen, I just feel like you one of the things you have to have as a director, obviously directing very important subjects, is that ability to trust. And I'm so curious, how did that differ working with your Berlin cast, and how you as a director do you kind of approach working with your subjects, because you're about to go on an epic journey with them as well, and maybe did that change over the course of time?
The relationship, I think really just investing in relationships is the primary role as a documentary director, because that trust and the ability for your protagonist to push back and tell you what they do and don't want, and to be able to tell a story that really is respectful but also intimate and deep and challenging. You can't do that by staying on the surface. You can't do that by sitting down and doing 1 or 2 interviews. So yeah, I think it's challenging sometimes and also extremely gratifying. I'm close now with all of the people who were featured in the film. I'm in touch with all of them, and I feel, that they have marked me in my soul for the rest of my life. But that those relationships grew tremendously over time. So I think that one thing that I feel really grateful in the end is that I did take the time that was needed, both to honor their stories, because of course along the way I was ready to be done years before we were actually done,
Yeah.
Come on. But things would continue to unfold in their life that I knew needed to be included in the film. And then in terms of the process of, people had partners who didn't want to be included, and I had to figure out how to take them out, and all the negotiation with people's families of how to do things respectfully. The conversations I had with them about how to represent their stories, all of that stuff takes time, and it's a process that I think is absolutely necessary if you're actually going to, like I said, really honor people's life stories, as opposed to just sort of extract them, take them, and then be like, well, hope they like it. If they don't, I guess that's okay, because it's their lives that are on screen. It's really their intimate lives that are exposed. And so that partnership is really, really important.
Absolutely. Well, I'm curious to know, of course, it may not be a one-size-fits-all kind of answer, but what did you want your audience to take from your film? I took so much from it, and I still am thinking about it constantly, but what did you want your audience to take from your film?
Yeah. You know, I really thought about sort of different audiences, knowing that depending on your relationship to these topics, you might take something different away. So certainly for people who really relate personally to the stories in the film, whether it's because they're from immigrant communities or racialized experience in some kind of way or a diaspora in some way, really a sense of the possibility to craft a beautiful relationship to one's like wings and roots, one's traditions and liberation, that we have this opportunity through these stories to see all the different ways that we can work with our experience, and then really use that to build solidarity, and see that this kind of struggle for justice is really not one community over here and one community over here, but like these are big systems that we need to work together to transform. So yeah, you know, breaking that isolation, feeling that sense of connection and solidarity. And then for people who maybe, I mean, for all people, for all audiences, I think a sense that, you know, migration is normal, it's natural, it's happening all over the world all the time. It's a kind of historical constant and part of the human condition. And we have to expand our ideas of belonging to include all of us, because the systems that we currently have are based on exclusion, you know?
Yeah.
So to really see that exclusion at play and see how it really affects humans' lives in material and emotional and psychic, spiritual ways, that you can, people that you really care about, that you come to care about over the course of the film, I hope sparks people's willingness to take more action in solidarity, even if they're not affected by these topics on a kind of personal level, but it affects our communities at large, you know, it affects our societies at large. So yeah, that's, you know, the search for belonging is something that I think all of us can relate to, like I said, but the way that certain people's experience is so marginalized around those questions because of their immigration status, their citizenship status, we need to fight that people don't experience that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'll go as far as saying, I mean, everyone that's got a heartbeat needs to see your film, because you know, each and everyone will feel something totally different, whether they relate to it or they can, you know, educate themselves or, you know, have empathy for what people are going through. It's a really special film, Christina. I honestly like it. I'm so glad that you made it. It's one of those films that like, I'm so glad you had the vision and the way you shot it and the way you just had us really part of the whole experience was unbelievable. Really, really fantastic. What is next for you?
Well, you know, we of course we continue to do work around impact with the film. So the film was not just a film, it's also we have a kind of education and impact initiative,
Yeah.
and we're doing workshops and screenings, and we have a web platform with wingsandroots.org where you can explore immigration history and stories from far more people than the four in the film. So that work is unfolding and continues. And then I am in development on a new documentary project that I feel a little careful to put out too publicly into the world yet, but it is based in Seattle where I'm based now. It's my hometown where I grew up actually. And yeah, I would say that I think it has maybe similarly will take a really personal lens on very large global phenomenal, but through really intimate stories. So this one may be looking a little bit more at global capitalism and real estate development and those topics. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your vision. Honestly, we're very excited. I'm already excited to see this next film. So, but thank you so much for this very, very important film. And just, it needs to be seen by everyone everywhere. So, and say a big thank you to all of your, you know, production team and to all of the subjects in your film, because, you know, it takes a lot to show you and your honest story, and we certainly appreciate them as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny, and thanks for the chance to share this work through New Filmmakers LA. It's been really a wonderful experience with the festival, and yeah, I just really appreciate the chance to connect.
Thank you, Christina.